Hey everybody, welcome to Chainlink Live. I'm Andy Boyan. I work for Chainlink Labs, and I'm here to talk to a video Q&A today with Taraxa. I'm super excited to talk to Justin and Stephen. Welcome, you guys. How you doing?
Great. Good to be here.
Doing great.
Awesome. Well, we're going to learn about your protocol, your blockchain that's not a blockchain. It's a DAG-based chain, but we're going to learn all about that and what you guys want to do. Everybody, we're going to wait just a few minutes for people to get in the chat. I'm going to pop a tweet real quick here so some people know they can come on in, and we'll get started in just a few minutes. So let's get to know you first. Stephen, why don't we start with you? How'd you get into crypto? Tell us about your background. Let's get started.
Thank you, Andy. It's really great to be here. My entry into crypto has been a long and windy road. I think I first heard about crypto back in 2013 from a friend, Bobby Lee, who created an exchange in China called Bitcoin China. Didn't really get it. Didn't really buy Bitcoin when it was super cheap. And then the second time I heard about it was from another Stanford classmate, Alex Liu, who told me about blockchain, right? The technology underneath Bitcoin. Went to a few Ethereum meetups and still didn't get it. The third time was the third classmate actually who quit his job as a trader in Hong Kong and told me that I really should take a serious look at crypto. And at that time, I think two aspects of my career had converged: running very small startups and advising executives from Fortune 100 companies. That made me realize that there was this organizational issue of lacking access to high quality, trusted data, and that really clicked for me. Right, so third time was the charm, and that happened in early 2017. And so that then started thinking about this project and quit my job in towards the second half of 2017 and started a project in late 2018. So
fantastic. Yeah, I feel like a lot of our stories start this way, where we get hints and nudges and don't pay attention until suddenly we do, and then it's all at once. Justin, how about you? How'd you get into this space and into Taraxa?
Yeah, so Stephen and I actually go way back. We were college buddies and it's at Stanford, class of 04, so feeling old now. And it was really Stephen that was talking to me about the excitement of blockchain and recruiting me. I had stayed at Stanford after he went off into the business world and got a PhD, and then I landed at Qualcomm after giving up on wanting to be an academic and deciding I really wanted to do something that made an impact in my own lifetime that I could see. And so he came to me, and up until that point, of course, I was aware of being a tech person, I was aware of blockchain, but to me it sort of seemed like a lot of hype. It's kind of like sounds like it's named after a data structure, and the downsides are like it's a technology that claims to print money, and it seemed very concerning because I wasn't really interested in finance. But when Stephen came to me and we were thinking about the applications to, changing IoT, changing the way the world does operations and solves trust gaps and whatnot, that got me really excited. And so, he kept twisting my arm, and I was busy getting married, and finally decided, hey, let's do this, because, one of the things that really is important to me as an engineer is to be able to make a difference in people's lives, and to be able to see that difference, right? I mean, that's the joy you get out of it. It's not from squashing bugs and just writing code for the sake of code's sake. So getting excited about the impact we can make with blockchain today, and this is the time, even though it's very early days in blockchain, it's really exciting. So
I'm a former academic as well, so there's a couple of us who slowly and then quickly came over to see a little bit different kind of side of the world. Now, so your concerns with, or early concerns with blockchain and money and the finance seem to shine through a little bit in your language around Taraxa, and you're not necessarily a payments platform, although crypto does deal with payments and finances. So tell us about Taraxa. What is it? How is it different from other sorts of blockchain-based systems? What do you guys do?
Yeah, sure. I'll talk a little bit about the business rationale, and I'm sure Justin has tons to talk about the technical uniqueness of our project. So we really look at our project as a full stack solution to tracking the world's informal transactional agreements, as well as unstructured data. So that sounds like a mouthful. And what does that mean? So we think that payments and currency, right? That's a great use case. That's a huge use case, right? But what we really saw as something else was that this really came from the convergence of two of my careers, right? Like I said before, running really small startups and advising really large companies. What made me realize after years of doing that is that large organizations and large projects and complex projects, they're running into this very, very serious problem in that they lack access to high quality data. And that's what prevents them from moving very quickly, right? Everyone says, oh, large organizations, they move slowly and they're not innovative. Well, that's because they don't have data, right? And that sounds ridiculous. Large organizations collect way more data than small startups, right? And why is it that they can move faster? Well, it's because they can't trust the data, right? This is very paradoxical, right? So if you're a small startup, 3-man team, 5-man team, everyone's very close to the market. You witness what's happening in the market, and then you're very responsive to it because you see it happening, and then you just quickly move, right? If you're a 5,000 or 50,000 or 500,000 organization, whether it's a large project or a single organization, the vast majority of people, they're not right there in the front lines witnessing what's happening in the market. So all that data comes to them second, third, fourth, fifth hand, right? If that's the way they collect data, then they need verification. If I didn't see something, I got to know whether or not this is true, right? Like people can't just keep feeding me garbage. And then you run into a problem because the vast majority of the world's data are informal, right? It's like, I call you up, Andy, and I say, hey, we're working on a project. I'm gonna change this button to blue. Like, you're okay with it, right? All right, fine, we're doing it. I didn't write that down, right? We didn't sign a legal contract, right? You and I directly witnessed it. Our boss and our boss's boss, how would they know about it? Well, first of all, most of the time they just wouldn't hear about it because they don't care, or we didn't write it down, and it doesn't really matter, right? And if they want to hear about it, guess what we have to do? You and I either have to sign an agreement, we have to meticulously record it down to some project management software, push it through some business process, and they will see it, right? So the amount of data that's able to capture is less than 20%. So over 80% of the world's operational data is really lost, right? They're not really captured. And even if they are captured, they're unverifiable. It's really like sort of, well, who knows whether or not this is true, right? So this is a very, very big problem. I mean, this is like fundamental to the way we work, right? And that was what really drove me into thinking about, well, what kind of technology can really help us solve this problem? Now, blockchain has this very interesting property. It makes some very interesting guarantees on data, right? So for off-chain generated data, it can actually guarantee provenance, like where the data is coming from, as well as immutability. After the data was generated, it wasn't actually tampered with. So these two things combined together, they can help enforce accountability of that data, right? It can tell whether or not data is true. I mean, computer systems usually can't. It's garbage in, garbage out. But it can help to enforce accountability. Now, the stakeholders within any kind of agreement, they know what's true or not, right? So as long as they can figure out that definitely who said what when, they can enforce accountability, and the incentive to lie goes way, way, way down, right? So this is actually a way for us to use technology, blockchain technology specifically, to really make operational data, all this 80% of unstructured, informal transactional data, trustworthy, right? And that is going to help us scale, like as human beings and human organizations. So that's what really drove me into creating, or jumping into this crypto world, because I saw that this technology was really it's the first technology in the world that can scalably address this problem. And no one is really addressing this problem in a scalable manner, right? So that's what got me really excited. And that's what Taraxa was really created for. And we created Taraxa really as a full stack solution. We have the layer 1 ledger as well as the application layer, right? And I think our approach is very practical as well. I mean, we are trying to make sure that our application development process doesn't become bottlenecked by the fact that we don't understand. If we didn't create layer one, then we wouldn't understand how to adapt the underlying infrastructure to the application's needs. And we're creating these applications because we didn't want a layer one that was just sitting out there doing nothing, right? Like most layer ones out there, that's what happened to them. So that's really our approach, and that's how I got in, and that's why I think we're very different than most of the other projects out there, because the type of problems that we're actually tackling is very, very different.
Yeah, I'm struck by the idea of when a startup changes into scaling mode, like when they move from 10 employees to 50 employees to 500 employees, there's always this problem of like, how do you get ideas from the stakeholders to everyone else? And how do you make sure that that happens correctly? And every startup I've seen, which is a couple now, they go from 10 people to 50, and it's like they got all of a sudden have to pay a ton of money on product management software and like all this sort of stuff. And then the record of truth is hard. Who's customers, right? Who are the clients, and what do they want, and who's in charge of stuff? So that is like this incredible amount of effort just goes into organizing yourself, and you don't know the truth there always. That's a major challenge. So Justin, what are some of the technical sort of advantages of a Taraxa? How have you guys designed this, and how is this different from a traditional blockchain-based system?
Yeah, so the goal of Taraxa is to make it very easy to quickly anchor agreements or data into the blockchain. So the DAG up front in our protocol really makes it a lot more quicker to get your to go from the creation of a transaction to having that be in the blockchain. And because we use a DAG that's entirely inclusive, once it's in the DAG, that transaction will be in the chain. You don't need to worry about, will there be a reorg? Will my transaction not get processed due to gas fees, etc.? So that provides very fast inclusion and fairness. But the downside to a DAG is that you don't have the instant finality. And because we want to do smart contract execution, and we want to basically have functionality, not just payments or transaction, that's why we have this additional consensus layer of PBFT built on top of that. So it's this sort of two-step protocol that allows a very wide net. It's kind of like a funnel. It allows a very wide net for transactions to be easily included, and it gets funneled down through PBFT so that you get a very high throughput of transactions and smart contract executions very quickly thereafter.
So if for our viewers, if you're not, hey, actually, welcome viewers. I want to make sure and do a welcome to you. We're Chainlink Live, and we're here with Taraxa, talking to Justin Snap and Stephen Poo about Taraxa and what they're doing. Justin just mentioned a couple of abbreviations I want to spell out for you guys. DAG is the first one. Justin, what's a DAG?
So that's a directed acyclic graph. So in a chain,
this is a great hangman word. You guys want to keep this one?
Yeah. So directed,
they're really efficient data structures.
Yeah, directed basically just means arrows, right? So just like a blockchain, one block points to another, and you have this lineage, right? So it's a family tree is kind of a DAG, right? And acyclic just means that if I follow the arrows, I can't find a path that would loop back to where I started. And graph just means we drew it out on a piece of paper, right? So the directed acyclic graph just means instead of there being one block that points to a previous block, and then every time you have two blocks pointing to the same parent, now there's like a fight, and only one of the siblings can win because you have to have a single chain. So in a DAG type protocol, you can actually have a whole family tree of blocks that actually point to multiple parents and whatnot. And through a certain algorithm, you can get a best estimate of that order. And so we take all these blocks that compete, and you could have the same transaction actually in multiple blocks, just because two different nodes produce blocks, hadn't heard about the other block yet, right? And in a lot of protocols, that would undermine the security of the network. But if you have the right algorithm, you can get an estimate of the best order. And then what PBFT does, so that's practical Byzantine fault tolerance. So that's basically just another type of consensus where nodes are talking to each other and they say, hey, I think we should agree on this. And then they make sure they agree on it. And then they finalize that they agree on it and move on to the next decision. So what that layer does in our protocol is it just says, okay, we have this estimate of the best order. Let's just agree on it. And once there's a certificate produced saying that we've agreed on that order, and we're a delegated proof of stake system, so that's how we decide who are the players within PBFT, then that order is finalized. And so now we can put that into the queue to get executed. And execution happens asynchronously from consensus, so you can end up having very high throughput.
So you can have consensus, which is like the strength of the blockchain. It tells you this is the truth. This is our history. You can get to the current state from our past state honestly, and it does it in a fast way. And there's a bunch of different sort of algorithms for coming to these different kinds of DAG-based algorithms. So thank you for going in. Our audience oftentimes likes a little more background on that stuff. If you guys want to know more, you can go look up directed acyclic graphs. Oh, I almost got tossed up on that one, but that was good. Okay, so you guys have this layer 1 protocol that has a DAG-based and then PBFT-based consensus. What are you building on top of it? What are some of the use cases for Taraxa and what's going on? Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about some of the application that we have, tried very hard to build a prototype for, as well as market test. So the first one that we actually ended up building, we started building at the end of towards the second half of 2019, and then it was actually a hardware solution called Helio, and what we did was that we created the problem that we're solving originally was for this asset leasing company based in Japan. And they were having a hard time figuring out how to agree with their clients how much their assets or these arcade machines were actually earning, because they have a profit splitting business model. It's very interesting. You have a business model in which you're renting out a machine and you split like 60-40 with your clients. How much the machine's earning. Who's to say how much the machine's earning, right? They've been getting these very strange reports about how the machine's earning next to nothing, but the customer would really like to keep renting it, right? And so it's kind of a very strange problem. They have over 20,000 orders. Their demand for their products were very high, especially across East Asia and Southeast Asia. But they just couldn't figure out how to agree with their customers, right?
Okay. So let me break this down. So I got an arcade machine. I rent it to you. People come in and they play it all day, and the machine makes $100. But you just go back and you take that $100 to a spreadsheet and you tell me how much you make.
Yeah, I tell you,
that's a really
it only made $20. I mean, I'm sorry.
Okay, so that's a really inefficient system. That's such a great use case where there's this trust, right? You have to trust. So we need a trust minimized system. Okay, sorry, I'm just going to need to break that down. I've never heard that example. Yeah. It's totally fantastic.
I would also point out that to me the interesting part was that system actually works pretty well if if everyone's quote making money, right? So I kind of feel like I know you. I've been doing business with you, and we're all making money. I just don't really know if I'm making the amount of money I should be making, right? It's kind of built in that uncertainty. But what ends up happening that really intrigued me was it turns out there's a lot of other people out there in the world that would like to rent the equipment from me. The problem is I don't really know them, right? Mm-hmm. So now it's really limiting, not just like, am I really getting full value for my money, but it's really limiting the scope of my business. And so by solving that trust gap, you can make the scope of your business a lot bigger. And so it's not about displacing a market. It's about creating a much bigger market. So that was what intrigued me when Steven brought this example to me.
Yeah. Fantastic.
I mean, these guys were doing business in Japan for like 40 years and they had no problems because Japan is the market that was very fixed. They knew all the players. They know they're getting screwed a little bit, but everyone's sort of, whatever, it's fine, but as soon as they start branching out to new customers, to new countries, new regions, they were just completely blown away, and because they had no way of knowing who these people are on the other side of the things. So I mean, our solution was, was a hardware and software integrated solution. We had a secure endpoint made with, a secure element and a write-once MCU that was integrated into these machines they were reporting out numbers like how many tokens people are the kids were putting in, how many tickets was spitting out, the machine's generic sort of operational status, right? And it was reporting data into a centralized cloud just as usual, but every 6 hours it would hash everything it had collected before, sign it, and put that into the blockchain, right? So now you have actually an audit trail of actually exactly what happened when, and you can guarantee that this data came from this machine, and then you can guarantee that after it was collected, it was invested, right? So those two guarantees are very powerful. So now, the cost of actually tampering with the data or lying about the data just went from me making up a random number, right, or going to a centralized database, messing with some numbers, to I gotta go and like manually pry open these machines and like somehow cut off these secure modules, and at the same time create a fake signal and hook it up into these things. Mm-hmm. And by that time, it's like not worth it to, it's really not even worth it for me to counterfeit, because that's too much cost, too much effort. I would have gotten discovered by then. So it actually just makes sure that everyone can agree that, hey, these numbers are actually real. So that was really the first application I think we looked at. And that was, how helping people to really trust data coming from machines, right? This is really sort of another form of, I would say, informal transactions, because it's unverifiable. There was a second platform that we were testing. It's called Marinate. Is that we actually were looking at people-generated data, right? So, like for example, in the construction industry, on a typical construction site, every single day you have over 100 one of these change orders, right, coming around, and these change orders are like, the blueprint needs update, material, time, all these things update, and most of them are flying around in text messages and phone calls, and they're just not recorded anywhere. And then that causes a lot of confusion later and disputes where people are like, did we talk about this? Like, you build a wall, what? Like, it's wrong. Like, we've got to knock it down. Mm-hmm. Well, who's the cops, right? All that kind of stuff all the time. So we integrate with these baseline communication tools to make sure that people don't need to learn a new application, right? They can use whatever tool they want. And we're still actually able to capture this data from within these informal transactions from within their applications. And it creates a record of who said what when. So later on, people are like, I lost my phone, I deleted my messages, I don't remember we're talking about that. Well, it's right here. Let's reduce the amount of confusion and cut it down from 2 days to like 1 hour, and then just get on with it, right?
So enterprise operational efficiencies, which is like another mouthful, but if you're in the B2B space, you love it. You just got very excited about this. We can formalize some of that informal stuff. Construction is such a great example. Here where I live, there are contractors, but then every contractor has a bunch of subcontractors, and they're all just totally informal agreements. So I got a roof guy, and I want something done to my windows. Well, he's got a window guy, and they may be good and they may be honest, but all that transaction ends up being done totally informally and with checks and who's paying who, and you don't know.
Yeah, so. It's very interesting with that example in particular. When we talk to investors and other people such as yourself, it totally boils down to whether or not they've ever done like a home remodel, right? The moment the person's done a home remodel, they're like, oh, I totally get that, right? And then if they haven't done a home remodel, they're like, oh, okay, that seems very interesting. It's kind of academic to them. But yeah,
we see this a lot with smart contract. People say, like, what's the point of a smart contract? And I've freelanced before in my past. And when you freelance, you agree to a payment and you do the work. And sometimes you get paid a little bit up front, but usually you're waiting for them to pay. And if you've ever waited to be paid, you get smart contracts right away, because all of a sudden you're trusting that they will pay, that they don't want to risk their reputation. And it's informal, and that would be a really nice thing just to have, just so I can plan, right? And most places I found, at least that I work for, they're not intentionally trying to scam anybody or not pay.
Exactly. Yeah.
But they don't have record of it either. They're changing systems. Like, things are fuzzy. It's hard. So I get what you guys talk about.
I was explaining to a friend the other day that if you think about it, in many ways, the contracts we sign today, we already sort of treat like smart contracts. When you get handed a 10-page contract, you don't really read through most of it, right? You sign it just because you assume, okay, well, this contract will end up in the justice system or something, and it'll get evaluated correctly, right? Like, they'll do the right thing. And so to me, I mean, that's like the whole point. With these informal agreements, the goal is not to like establish a legal record, and to take it to court. It's to establish an operational record so that, all the parties can avoid going to court, like the right thing can just be decided on, clarity can be established. And, you talked about enterprise, and we've actually talked to people within, big companies like that online jungle retail store and whatnot. And companies like to stand up, short-term projects where they draw in people from random teams that are otherwise very cushy in their established role, and then they do something for a little while, and there's all these issues about like documenting what's been done, who was on the team, And then if that project's a success, it actually turns out being kind of like a hot potato that no one wants to claim ownership of, because, maybe you've been working on this new project for a month within the company and it looks like it might be going somewhere, but you don't really know. It might not go anywhere. So now if you leave your current job and you get attached to this to this new project and that project gets canceled, well, now where you stand within the company, maybe you just lost your job. So people end up not wanting to have clarity about these, activities and operations within the company because they don't want to be dragged into things. And so, our goal is to make the barrier to documenting what you're doing, whether it be a change order on a construction site or something, within a larger enterprise, just really low to do, so that there can be no excuse relatively for not providing this clarity. And you don't really know the value of any individual agreement. It could be not that useful, but the value ends up in having the body of agreements that are auditable and can be handed off to anyone too. Because it's in the blockchain, the parties that might be interested in this might not even be present. Like if you're building a building, you don't know who the buyer will be when you're building that building. But when the buyer buys the building, you can say, hey, look, here's the body of work that's been done on this building. There's no like outstanding weird agreements. Like everyone's kind of signed off on it over time and it's been well planned. So that part is really what's unique from the blockchain and provides tremendous value.
First house I bought, we were surprised by this, and so was our realtor. But when they moved out, they left the blueprints and all the remodel blueprints in the house. And so when we had contractors out there, like, oh, yeah, this is helpful. Usually it's a mystery. So sorry, another contractor example, but it fits very well in this context. We've got a couple of questions, and we're coming up on time. So I want to ask you guys. The Chainlink timestamp oracle, something that we're excited about. We had a hackathon piece or a developer blog come out last year about an alarm clock that used these sort of timestamps, and now I see you guys are implementing something similar. So talk a little bit about what is this timestamp oracle? What does it do for you guys?
Yeah, so timestamps, right? They're very interesting because people who are purely dealing with on-chain data, they don't really care about time, right? If you're sending coins around or executing purely smart contract assets, you don't care about time. What you care about is ordering, right? Like, if you get the ordering right, who cares about what time is, right? Well, as soon as you start dealing with things that are off-chain, Chainlink does that, a lot of it. We do that, a lot of it. Then time begins to matter a lot, right? It sounds ridiculous, but yeah, time actually matters. So why does it matter, right? In these informal agreements are just like any business agreements, right? For example, people make promises on performing to a specific time frame. For example, this will get delivered within X amount of time, or something like that. So there are a lot of contractual terms, even when they're informal, that are actually tied to time, and their payment and their result and their impact are tied to time. There are other reasons why. Like, for example, if I say like, hey, Andy, I owe you $100. I'll pay you $10 every week until it's paid off, or something like that. No interest, because you're a nice guy, right? So all right. So I'm supposed to pay you every week, right? Well, then that's time, right? So I need to be paying you every week on the dot. If I'm not doing that, well, there's something wrong there, right? You're gonna call me up, be like, hey man, what's going on? They have to come over there and stuff like that. So, and in general, even if there aren't any time-related clauses implied or explicitly stated in these informal agreements, timestamps are also very important just to establish whether or not establish accountability, right? You were talking about being freelancers. So let's say I'm a project, I'm working with 3 freelancers. And they're doing things that are very closely related to each other, very interdependent to each other. And middle of the night, I said, look, I want to change something, and that impacts all 3 of them, right? And I talked to 2 of them, and right away, and say, hey, we're going to make this change. And the 3rd guy, I forgot to talk to him about. And I remember like 5 days later, oh crap, I need to talk to the 3rd guy, right? And I talked to him, and he was like, oh, I wish you talked to me this earlier, because the 3 of us have to work together on this, right? You didn't tell me about it. Well, that actually matters, right? So if you actually just look at not just the ordering, but how much time has elapsed between me notifying and talking to these 3 freelancers, then that establishes accountability, right? It's my fault that this didn't get done, because I should have told all 3 of them, at least at the relatively same amount of time, right? Not like two guys one day and like a week later the third guy, and they're all caught by surprise and that kind of thing. So time is obviously very, very useful, and we need, and on blockchain natively there is no trusted source of time, because like I said, blockchain doesn't care about time, right? It cares about ordering. And this is very interesting. So we needed a decentralized, trustworthy source of time. And who better than the best oracle in the world today, Chainlink, to actually provide that.
Yeah, blockchains don't need to know time. And there is incentive to manipulate time if you can. So when you think about, I think people who have not been in startups don't know how much negotiating there is about when you pay your bills as a startup to another startup. And like there's a whole like sub industry that's going on about when are people going to pay, how much they're going to pay when. And to have that established as a formal time mechanism really, really matters for people. I mean, because startups need to make payroll, is what it comes down to, and they're figuring out how to do that. But formalizing that, you need some source of time as well. Justin?
Yeah. So, I mean, the way it works from a technical standpoint is, we all have, most of us have like a watch, or, I replace my watch with my phone, and my computer has a sense of time. But, if we let the individual people report their time, right, like, then it's self-interested, right? So, and you could say that Taraxa nodes might have a sense of time, but by having it be off-chain, it's really disinterested from, the parties on the chain. And so the Oracle mechanism, analogous to the price feed that Chainlink uses for prices, a time feed really provides a very accurate and decentralized and cost-efficient sense of time that you can build any application on Merit or on Taraxa in our ledger on top of, to have a sense of time. And that unlocks not only the operational value of being able to say, okay, I'll pay you at this point, and I did pay you at this point, or we have to reach agreement by this point, but also allows you to unlock, sort of the financial DeFi value of, look, I can establish this history of dealing with someone. I can establish this history of making good payments on time, et cetera. And therefore, to get the credit and to negotiate, how my startup pays your startup, et cetera. So there's tremendous financial value as well.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic use case for decentralized Oracle for Chainlink. So I was really glad to see it. I saw the announcement come out, and I was excited to meet you guys as well and talk a little bit about it. We have a couple of questions here, and then we'll wrap up. The first one, we have a couple of questions about staking. So you guys have a proof of stake consensus mechanism where there is staking. Is it ready to stake? And then one question is, there's a staking yield set to a particular level. Is that set, or what are some of your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I think and maybe I'll talk a little bit about it, and I think Justin can specifically talk about the technical readiness. I think we've been internally testing staking for a while now. So it is something that we started working on pretty early on, and we just want to make sure that it all gets thoroughly tested before we release it. We will be releasing an incentivized testnet very, very, very soon, and then staking will follow that. The yield, we do have a yield curve actually defined inside our white paper. So the maximum annualized yield is going to be 20% on the basis of how much you stake. That's what we set. We will be releasing staking soon when it's after the incentivized testnet is released. So everyone will have a chance to actually test it out, and we do obviously want the community to help us test it out, because that's how you test anything, right? Just testing ourselves is not really going to work very well. It's a critical milestone towards us achieving a stable mainnet.
Somebody's asked why 20%. So Justin, if you want to think about that in your answer as well, we'd be curious.
Well, that's kind of a business question, so I might defer to that one on Stephen. But I mean, from an analytical standpoint, there is obviously sort of an optimal amount to be staked, right? But I would say the economics, it remains a work in progress for all blockchains, including ours. But as well as introducing, some of the changes that you're seeing happening in Ethereum with burning transaction fees. That'll be coming to our chain as well. And actually, one of the nice things about being a DPoS chain is we don't have any of the controversy that you might have where you have miners doing proof of work, right? So I think everyone agrees that the burning of fees will be a good thing for the transaction generators in Ethereum. It's just a question of whether or not it's a good thing for the miners. Well, in our chain, everyone can agree it's a good thing because there are no miners, right? But it just increases the value of the coin, which is one of the nice things about DPoS. In terms of the technical readiness, as Stephen pointed out, we sort of a two-step process. We first want to actually produce a bunch of people running nodes. So we're going to incentivize node running, and that's coming very, very soon. We're just sort of working on lowering the bar to running a node, documentation, building better binaries, putting in place a program to run node runners and whatnot. And then once there are nodes running and we've achieved that goal, then we'll move on to staking, so that people can stake on actual nodes, right? And so that's the process. From the technical side, it's very, very close, and we're working on it here.
Fantastic. Well, I don't hold anybody to timelines here because I've been in tech long enough to know that roadmaps they're tough. So we do have one other question that I was asked a little while ago. So I have heard your question from one of your fans, and I was saving it to the end. So crypto is blowing up right now. DeFi is big. Informal transactions and smart contracts are a big deal. What, in your view, like industry-wide, what is it going to take to see some of that mass adoption? With Taraxa as well, as your fan is asking, like, what is it going to take, and what are sort of your next steps beyond just the technical roadmap and staking, but like philosophically, what are your next steps, and how are we going to see some adoption?
Sounds good. I'll take a quick crack. First, I'll quickly answer the question. The 20% staking yield, we benchmarked against a lot of the other layer 1 protocols on the market when we set that number. And 20% seems to be basically on the high end, very, very high end of that number. So that's what we figured to be competitive. Now, I mean, I'm sure there are lots of DeFi protocols out there that have thousands of % yield every day or something like that. I mean, it gets a little crazy. But from a layer 1 perspective, that's what we're benchmarking against. In terms of how we are going to drive adoption, I think for us, we and this is a work in progress. We are still getting better at communicating with the community around this. We think that we, as a project, need to refocus a little bit our application towards more catering more towards the crypto community first, right? Because the thing that we're learning is that before, I think we were very much exclusively focused on the non-crypto community as potential customers, right? So asset leasing companies, automotive companies, like construction contractors and subcontractors, stuff like that. People who don't know about blockchain and can't care less about blockchain, right? They just don't care, right? Now, what we've slowly learning is obviously that the blockchain world is full of very, very early adopters, and things move very quickly if you have an application that that actually adds value and makes sense, and it can really help to be very quickly iterate and validate some ideas very, very quickly, organically, right? If you actually get the incentive right. It actually just spreads on its own. It's very, very interesting. So we are very aggressively exploring with our investors, with our partners, what are some of the use cases we can actually start deploying, actually within the crypto community to actually help this, get further along. Our mission to track informal transactions and informal transactional agreements, it's not going to change. It's just that we want to make sure that the crypto community actually cares about it, because like what Justin said, with something like a marinade, is sort of the people who don't get it, they're just like, why are you doing this? Like, maybe that's like 60-70% of people, right? And the people who do get it, like, oh my God, yes, this is very necessary, but they're a very tiny percentage of people. And so what we do want to, and that's actually good, by the way, as far as startups go, because that means you're focused on a very specific and often not widely known, understood pain point, right? But it just happens that it doesn't overlap well with crypto. So we do want to make sure that we take the same philosophy and move it into the crypto world, and actually see it getting validated and iterated at a much faster pace than it would in the non-crypto world.
I've studied technical innovations for years, and crypto has a challenge of it needs an aha moment. So people don't just like get into it because like, your DVD is like, oh, I guess I'm using DVDs instead of VHS now, or I guess I'm using Blu-ray now. That there wasn't really a choice. But with crypto, it needs somebody to go like, I get it now. Whoa. And that is a little bit more of a lift sometimes, especially when you're talking about enterprises adopting a whole new software. Like that impacts a lot of people and a lot of bottom lines. So go ahead.
The philosophy, you mentioned Blu-ray and whatnot. I mean, Steven and I, when we think about blockchain technology, we're very much a believer that, like if you compare that to the personal computer, for example, the challenge is that it's not really a technology replacement the same way the personal computer, by the time you got to the Macintosh, you could see the file folder and there was the desktop and, a little printer icon and a trash can. And you could look around your office and you could be like, okay, that replaces that filing cabinet, that replaces the trash can, that replaces the printer. My desktop's now going to be on my computer. I don't need to worry about paper on my desk. And it was a one-to-one replacement, the same way the computer replaced the typewriter or the way the car replaced the horse and buggy. Whereas we strongly believe that blockchain is really not so much a technology replacement. It's an additive layer on top, just taking a well-functioning centralized system and decentralizing it. All you've done is add cost. But if you already trusted the centralized system and it was working for the few number of parties involved, then decentralizing it isn't really a good thing, right? And so we've been working very hard to establish, new business models and new ideas that aren't really taking place to, expand markets or enable new ways of operating. And that takes time. I mean, you look at studies that say everyone agrees blockchain is going to change the way they do their business. They just don't know how it's going to change the way they do their business. So I think, 2021, we're seeing a lot of people get into payments finally. The whole weight of DeFi has really legitimized currencies and, of course, legitimized finance. But moving on to like operational activities and capturing the value of that in blockchain and doing things in new ways, that's a work in progress that's going to come, either later in 2021 or 2022. Who knows? It's blockchain.
Your metaphors about the file holder and things are really apropos. With DeFi, you can look at your bank's yield and you can look at DeFi yield and you can say like there's decimal points that have moved. Like that is really significant difference. Whereas like with a blockchain structure or a DAG structure compared to a bank account structure and like where they're doing their holdings, like people just don't have insight into that. And the people who do often have a very vested interest. So so it is a challenge. However, we do see those advantages. Like once you see the comparison of a Bitcoin or other crypto issuance compared to Fed issuance or other sorts of monetary policy, there are real differences here. You can see that, but it does take a little bit of a larger leap. I've got one more question for you guys. I've had a really nice time talking to you. From my pal Mark, who's been helping out in the YouTube chat, what is the meaning of Taraxa?
Good question.
Yeah, so Taraxa, I mean, originally I wanted to name it Dandelion, but of course, Dandelion, anything is taken already, right? It's not really, it's a very common word. The reason why we wanted to use Dandelion was because it struck me as very interesting imagery that you blow on the dandelion, all the seeds sort of flying around and then take root and then become another dandelion, they spread more seeds. So it's sort of like a decentralized ecosystem that just fly out, independently grow on their own and spread more. So it's very interesting imagery. So the Latin name for the most common species of dandelion is Taraxacum officinale. And Taraxacum sounds kind of stupid, so I just took out the last part and turned it into Taraxa. So that sounded kind of cool. So that's our name. I think the other candidate was the French name of dandelion, which is the lion's teeth, dent de lion or something like that. That didn't sound as cool as Taraxa. So.
I agree. I like the name. I like where you guys ended up with it. I appreciate you guys talking to me for a minute here. And Chainlink, that I think I'm frozen.
Yeah, it's frozen with a nice smile though.
Oh, okay. But you guys can still hear me. Anyways, yep. Well, I'll finish up with my nice smile. It's been great talking to you guys and getting to know your project. Thank you to all our audience for coming and viewing. This will be up on YouTube in perpetuity on the Chainlink Labs channel. So feel free to direct people here. I'll send a tweet out about this later as well. Just to wrap up, where should people go to find you?
Yeah, you can find us on Twitter at Taraxa_project. You can also join our Telegram. It's also Taraxa_project. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for joining us. To our audience, thank you to Mark for running the YouTube chat for me, and we appreciate it very much. Thanks for coming on Chainlink Labs, Chainlink Live, guys. Talk to you guys later.
Yeah, talk to you guys. Great talking to you, Andy. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.